Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Tuesday tip, where in this video I'm going to tell you what to do if your brake arms are rubbing on your tire. I've had this question a couple times recently, so I figured I would just make a video dedicated to this to help anyone who is having this issue. Because with bigger tires in BMX these days and brakes somewhat seeming like they're coming back, plus a lot of the guys who continued to ride brakes having these bigger tires, you might run into the issue of your tires rubbing on your brake arms. There's a couple easy things that you can do that you might not have thought of in order to fix this. So first, let's take a look at the situation. So as we can see here, I've got plenty of clearance between my brake arms and my tire. We spin the wheel, nowhere close to rubbing. But if we disconnect the brake cable here, you can see that we're replicating the problem. We spin the wheel, you can hear it rubbing on the brake arm. So before we get into the complex solutions for this problem, let's start with the easy things, the no-brainer things that you might not have thought of, but could solve your problem very, very quickly. The first of these is that the brake arms don't always rub on the tire on the front here. Sometimes with these bigger tires, you'll have rubbing on the sides. And in that case, centering your wheel could be the only solution that you need. It could be that your brake arm is rubbing on the inside here, and all you need to do is move your wheel this way or this way in order to get it to be more centered and stop rubbing on the brake arm. Now, that might be a very obvious solution to some of you, and you might have already checked that. The next thing that I would say is if your brakes are rubbing and you have it centered, to double check the trueness of your wheel. Because if it's off too far and you have very little clearance, that could be causing your problem. This is also a very simple no-brainer solution, but it's easier to do than to completely rework your brake setup. And when we take a look at how close this actually is to not rubbing anymore, yes, it is forward, which would be an up and down hop if it were, but just taking out that much of a hop, if that's what's causing that, could mean that it's the very easy solution without moving my wheel or anything, or taking it off or adjusting the brakes whatsoever. So those are the first two things that I would suggest, the most easy, simple, obvious solutions. To those of you watching this right now, yelling at the screen saying how truing a wheel is absolutely not easy, take a look at Park Tools videos and just try to think about it logically and practice a little bit, and you'll be truing wheels perfectly straight in no time. That's how I did it. If I can do it, you can do it. So moving on from there, let's take a look at what this problem is. So when we look at this, in order to solve this problem, what we need to do is pull the brake arm out. The further we pull it out, the more clearance we have pretty much all the way around. So connecting the brake cable would obviously do that. But if it were connected already and we were still rubbing, we would want to try to pull it out. And another super easy solution to this is to just tighten or loosen your barrel adjuster, whichever one this actually is. Off the top of my head, I don't know right now, but the very easiest solution, aside from centering and truing your wheel, which I would say you do want to do first, because you want to make adjustments after everything is centered versus with something offset. It just makes your bike ride better and makes more sense in the steps of things. So you would tighten or loosen the barrel adjuster to pull your brake arm away from the rim. Now, I realize this might not solve everyone's problems because, well, what if my brake pad's too close to the rim? Or what if all of the number of things that could come up? If tightening your barrel adjuster isn't an option, if your brake pads are too close to your rim and tightening it just makes it hit your rim, where can I go from here? Well, I have a solution for you. Now, for those of you who've been following along so far, who've centered your wheel, you trued your wheel, you've tried to adjust your barrel adjusters, and it just made your brake pads come into contact with your rim, or you don't have the brake pull that you would like, and you're still having problems with your brake arms rubbing your tires, the next solution is in your brake pad. So let's take a look at this brake pad here, and pretty much all brake pads are very similar in this. You can see that we've got these spacers on here. We've got a thicker one and a thinner one. And if we take a look at my setup here, I'm not sure how well you'll be able to tell, but we have the thicker one on the outside and a thinner one on the inside. What you'll want to check is which one you have where. If you have the thicker brake pad on the inside, let's take a look logically what this would be doing. So with the thicker brake pad on the inside, that would mean that this brake arm would need to be further out in order to not come in contact with the rim currently. If we had that thicker one in there instead of the thinner one, my brake pad would be rubbing on my rim. And in doing that, and in pulling this out, you can imagine that that is going to push the brake arm closer to the tire. If we take off this cable, you can see what I mean. Pulling this pad further away from the rim pushes it closer to the tire, which is exactly what happens when you have that thicker spacer in there. So you can imagine the next solution that you can try is swapping out your spacers. Put the skinnier one on the inside, which will mean that you'll be able to put your pad closer to your rim, which will put your brake arm further away from the tire. And that is a solution that you can do without moving your wheel, without changing too much. You may end up having, after the fact, to adjust your cables and how they sit. You may be able to get away with just adjusting it in the barrel adjusters, but you may end up having to pull some slack out of your cable because that's going to give you more slack. Pulling these further away than they were is going to give you more cable in here, and you're going to have to compensate for that somehow. So if you're not into all of that, I've got another solution that's about an equal amount of work, but might be a little bit easier for those of you who don't like to tinker with your brakes quite as much. So if we're looking at this right now, brake arms are rubbing on the tire. We can't get this to go further this way, so what do we need to do? We need to get the tire and the rim further back. So if you have slack in your chain and you have enough dropouts, you can move your wheel backward and it's going to pull it away from the brake arms. I had to do this previously and it worked for me, but it does change your wheelbase. It's going to change your manual balance point. It's going to change your chain tension. So there's a lot of things that it can affect. You will also probably have to adjust your brake pads so that they have the contact that you would like. So this is one that's pretty involved, but it also could be a better option for some people than taking out and changing the spacers and having to adjust their brakes completely. And so if none of this has worked for you so far, centering and truing your wheel, as well as trying to adjust your barrel adjusters, swapping the spacers out on your brake pads, moving your wheel as far back as you can with your current chain in the way that it is, the only solution that I have left is to add a link in your chain and then move your wheel back even further, provided that you have enough dropout to do so. You want to make sure that your axle stays in your dropout as best that you can. You don't want it hanging out of your dropout because that's just unsafe. You may be able to just add a half link. You may end up having to get a different chain, but moving your wheel as far back as you can while also swapping out the spacers on your brake pads and adjusting your barrel adjusters, a combination of all of those things should get you to a point where your brake arms aren't rubbing your tires. It may get you to a point where your tire's rubbing your frame, but if that's the case, there are frames available these days for these bigger tires to compensate for how insanely wide they are, to where you don't have to worry about it on your frame, and then you do all of these things that I've talked about, and you may not have to worry about it on your brake arms as well. So with that being said, I hope you guys found this video useful. I hope that you could use it to make your brake arms stop rubbing on your tires, and I hope that means you'll have super dialed brakes because of that. If not, check out my other brake videos in this playlist right here or other Tuesday tips below it. And I hope that you guys found enough use from this one that if you're new here or you haven't yet, you can hit the subscribe button down below to see another one tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.